Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Earth Day Everyday webinar series. My name is Sal Mangiafico. I'm with Rutgers Cooperative Extension, mostly in Salem and Cumberland counties. I'm going to be hosting this evening. And of course, we're so glad you could be here with us this evening. Rutgers Cooperative Extension is a part of Rutgers University and the New Jersey Agricultural Experiment Station, and we're the outreach part of the university. We are a partnership with the counties and the university, and we uh, we extend the resources and the information from the university to citizens throughout the state. And by the way, every county has an extension office. So if you need information about something that we cover, please feel free to contact your extension office in your county. So this is the first webinar in the fall series for this year. And the series topic is What a Wonderful World, an environmental jukebox for New Jersey. And we'll be talking about throughout the fall here with 4 webinars, some of the issues, environmental issues that affect the Garden State, some of the challenges and ways we can help improve environmental quality and, quote, change your tune. So this webinar series is a partnership with Rutgers Earth Day Every Day and the Rutgers Marine Extension Program Seminar Series. I'll be your main host this evening. Steve Yerjo is my co-host, who will be helping me behind the scenes. A couple of housekeeping items. Everyone's muted. If you have questions, please put them in the chat. So the chat will look like 2 speech bubbles. Either should be at the bottom menu, either on your phone or on your computer screen. And we are recording tonight, and the recordings are available. I think we email them out to participants, but if not, they're always available on the Rutgers Earth Day Everyday webinar series webpage. And you can see an archive of past talks as well there. Okay, if you could go to the next slide, Jason. All right, so towards the end of the presentation, a poll will pop up asking you some questions about what you learned at tonight's webinar. From the university's point of view, this is research because we're asking you questions about it. So you'll get the first question will be if you consent to have us use your data. And this on the screen right now is a description of the consent form itself. If you have questions of being a research subject, you can feel free to contact the Rutgers Internal Review Board or one of your hosts tonight, and we can clear up any questions. Go to the next slide, Jason. Rutgers, of course, is an equal opportunity program provider and employer. And there on the screen now is a few pieces of contact information if you have any questions or concerns about that. All right, and with that, you can go to the next slide, Jason, if you wish. I'm very happy tonight to introduce Jason Grabosky, who will be speaking about autumn leaves, conditions that affect leaf color. Next week, we'll also have a webinar Monday night, which is about wetlands in New Jersey with Ben Langley and Lisa Clark from Ducks Unlimited. Okay. Jason Grabowski is a professor at Rutgers Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Natural Resources, and an extension specialist, specializing in urban forestry and tree growth, and is affiliated with the Rutgers Urban Forestry Program. He is taxonomically described as a professor and serves as the John and Eleanor Kusser Endowed Faculty Scholar in Urban Forestry in the Ecology, Evolution, and Natural Resources Program at Rutgers University. Holds affiliations with plant biology, environmental science, landscape architecture programs, as well as with the Engineering School Center for Advanced Infrastructure and Transportation. primarily teaches classes in and around urban forestry and has fun making students walk outside in lousy weather. More recent research interests have to do with where students' interests are going. Um, so concerning growth expectations in an urban context applied to civicultural planning, stocking guides of pitch pine in New Jersey, public attitudes on black bear, white deer, and Canada goose controls, genetics in the hard maple group, and tree root system architecture studies. Um, with that, I think we've all heard enough from me. Thank you, Jason, for presenting tonight, and welcome everyone.
And away we go. Hello, everybody. Tonight we're going to be talking about leaves. This is an interesting tree that I'm just going to talk about very quickly. This is a red maple, but it's a very particular Carolina variant of red maple that always has yellow foliage in the fall with red veins, which I think is just really cool. And it confuses people that think that red maple should have red fall color. In this case, it just does not. So I'm a tree guy at heart. It's been a really interesting year, and a lot of people have been asking questions about leaves in a lot of different forms, from how late in the season before they start turning to when it's peak. And of course, everybody wants to know when it's best around them. And the quick answer is if you ever want to be proven wrong, make a guess about when it's going to be peak foliage in any specific location. But this is a view out of my backyard, looking across the valley, and it's always nice to see because I can, wax poetic about different plant communities based on reading the landscape using fall color alone, which is always fun and makes the students afraid of you, just that little bit so you can keep teaching. We're going to be talking about plants and we're going to be talking about leaves. And leaves are really important as organs. They are the organs that are primarily responsible for collecting solar radiation and turning that radiant energy into chemical energy in the form of sugars through photosynthesis. And the thing is, plants all possess the same machinery to do photosynthesis in that transfer of energy, and they all use the same mechanisms to store the machinery, and that's going to be the plastids, the chloroplast, and then the associated organelles as far as moving the energy around. So when we look at a leaf, and this happens to be an oleander leaf on the left, it's a very specific structure for a very specific organ. Usually on the top edge of the leaf, as it's collecting energy, you're going to have a wax cuticle. And it typically on the top edge is rather thick and it's going to be rather smooth with overlapping plates of wax on that surface. And that's to prevent the leaf from drying out in the sun because this is the side that's being shown toward the sun. Immediately after that, we have a series of cells that are going to give us a little bit of a thickened cell wall for rigidity. And directly below that, and hopefully you will see my cursor here, we have a layer here called the palisade layer. Uh, Sal, can we see my mouse moving there?
Yes, I can see your mouse.
Okay, good. Okay. So this is where the meat and potatoes of our light collection is going to be. This is where we have all of those chlorophytic zones in this palisade layer. Below that, we get into a spongy mesophyll so that we can have gas exchange and water exchange in this zone. And then these darkly colored areas, these are your vascular tissues. So the xylem is where the water is going to come up in and then move out. When we get photosynthesis, they're going to move to the phloem and move those sugars out of the leaf into the rest of the plant as needed. And of course, we need to have gas exchange. So usually the gas ports are on the bottom edge of the leaf. In oleander, they happen to be in these crypts. So this is the hole for the stomata. This is where the guard cells are, and this is how gas gets in from the bottom. The bottom edge has those thickened cells again for some rigidity. Also, it has usually a layer, a cuticular layer down here, and often we'll see hairs on the underside of the leaf, or we will see a couple of different growth attitudes in this zone to facilitate air exchange and to slow the wind speed so that we're not sucking the air out, sucking all of the water vapor out of the leaf. How that manifests, this happens to be white poplar on the right, and you can see the upper side of the leaf is dark green and waxy. The underside of the leaf is covered in hairs, all these minute white hairs, and there's also some wax chunks in here. And so it slows the wind speed over all of the gas ports on the undersurface of the leaf. And that gives you that two-tone look that you see in silver poplar. And you can recognize it from about a quarter mile away. It's just one of those trees that shimmers silver in the distance. As the leaves come out from the bud and they start enlarging, they have to start carrying their own load as soon as they're photosynthetically competent. So they grow incredibly fast. And in some cases, we're producing sugars while the leaves are still expanding, and we keep the sugars in there. And that's when we start seeing the development of some anthocyanins here, that red young growth color in some of our leaves. So we actually get some of these colors early in the spring, but then they get masked with chlorophyll as the leaf comes online and starts moving full force as an organ. We can see those colors also manifest. Here's red maple seed. These mature in the spring. This is rather dramatic. These happen to be a set of red maple in the Acadia National Park, and they always have these incredibly vibrant red seeds. And again, that's just the tissue with a lot of energy, a lot of sugars in the system as those seeds are maturing, and that can produce pigment because the anthocyanins here need to have sugars in the system to build this complicated color. On the right, you can see how it gets regionally distributed, predominantly in that palisade layer just underneath the top. That's where all your chloroplasts are. And until you have chlorophyll really going, that's where you're going to see that red color. It's all in the top of the leaf. Now, it doesn't always have to be that way. On the upper left side, we have Gladitsia triacanthos. This is honey locust. And we do select varietals that really lower their chlorophytic production, and it unmasks this yellow pigment that we have right here. It's just not being overwhelmed by green. Usually, what we're seeing are green leaves. We do select for yellow leaves in sunbursts, particularly. These ones, they come out, they stay yellow, and then they green up over time. That's not to be confused with something else. This is a chimeric maple. This is Norway maple, a variegated Norway maple, where we have genotypes that are blending in the terminal bud and manifesting in a reliable way in the leaf. So you have two different signals that build this variegation on the leaf. The wax, as I said, is a rather important part. These are white oak leaves. After a rain, you can see the water's beating up on the top, and then this water will run right off of the leaf. But this is due to waxes on the top edge, just as plates, just protecting that leaf tissue. Here we have it again, only this time we're not looking at deciduous tree leaves. We're looking at conifer leaves that are multiple year leaves. In this case, we're looking at Colorado spruce, and those wax plates build almost like a popcorn layer all around the needle, which is actually a leaf. It's a multi-year leaf, and that popcorn wax is reflecting the light. And just like when you have a really deep snowdrift, you see blue colors in the snow. Here you see the blue getting reflected through the light refraction going through all those wax plates. And so if you have a blue spruce like you see on the left here, up close on the right, all you have to do is rub those needles with your fingers and the blue comes right off. And it's just that regular green needle underneath that protected wax layer of blue. And it's important because you have to get air through the wax layer if it's all around the needle. In Superstorm Sandy, we saw a lot of damage to conifer trees because Sandy was a dry storm. So when the storm came ashore, it brought a lot of saltwater aerosol in with it, and that landed on the trees. Now, usually in a wet storm, that gets followed by a lot of rain and it washes that salt water off. But in the case of Sandy being a dry storm, it just stayed on those needles and it destabilized the waxes, collapsed all that wax and suffocated the needles. And that's why we saw so much foliage death on a lot of the pines down in South New Jersey. That also happens with conifer trees on the edge of roadways. If you've got road salt aerosol being sprayed during the wintertime, a lot of that winter kill on the needles is just basically destroying that popcorn aspect of the wax on the needles, and it just seals off and suffocates the gas exchange in the needle. Needles are pretty cool, but when we think of evergreen trees, the reason they're evergreen is a needle is built for multiple years. So we always have some live needle on the tree. But once they hit the end of their life phase, they turn fall color and fall off just like any maple or oak or dogwood leaf does. And so in the fall, particularly in eastern white pine, which is on the lower left, I mean the lower right on your screen, I'll occasionally get calls for people saying, the inside of my white pine is turning yellow. What's wrong? And the answer is, there's nothing wrong. It's just that those needles are now turning their fall color and getting ready to drop. But our evergreen trees have multiple year needles. And so when we look at them, if we see it all on the inside coming out, we're usually not that worried about it. It's when we see the new needles on the tips of the branches turning colors, that's when we have to start getting nervous. Needles are just like that oleander leaf, only wrapped around. And in this case, this is a single needled pine, Pinus monophylla. And because it's a gymnosperm rather than an angiosperm, there are some different aspects to it, such as the resin ducts, also the transfusion tissue. It's just a slightly different organization for something that's a tubular leaf for multiple years that has to deal with overwintering, whereas a deciduous tree doesn't have that mechanical problem with ice and snow. So you're not going to see all of this specialized structure. But the pine needle is a really useful thing for us to think about because it shows us a beautiful balance between photosynthesis and mechanics and water and being able to do more without adding a lot of extra weight. So when we think about pine needles, they usually come as 2-needled pines, 3-needled pines, 5-needled pines. And if you put all of those needles together, they form a column. And at the base of the column, it's wrapped in this papery sheath so that we have a really solid cantilevered device with all of these needles coming out that are supposed to do gas exchange. And all those little white dots you see are stomata. Now, the interesting thing is that when we open that up, now this is eastern white pine, this is a 5-needled pine. What we've done is we've taken that cylinder where the gas exchange is only on the outside of the cylinder, and by dividing the needles, I've multiplied by over 2 times the surface area to do gas exchange and photosynthesis. without adding any biomass to that leaf or that cantilever. So I'm getting a lot more gas exchange, water exchange for a same unit weight. It's a really interesting adaptation, and it's kind of fun to think about that and just how incredible these things are at building something that's going to last 3 years through some of the worst weather, and they're still flexible and soft. Whether it's a pine or whether it's an oak, usually we think about the color of the leaf as being green. And basically, that's the color that's being reflected back at us. And chlorophyll is the name of the game if we're thinking about green. This is the first of our pigments. It's one of the more important ones. This gives us a huge bang for our buck as far as photosynthesis. Now, what I want to point out with this is that everything, all of them have thylakoids and stroma, and what we have for chlorophyll is this flag that's all carbon and hydrogen, a couple of oxygens here and there, but it's all carbon and nitrogen in this big flag. Then it goes down a carbon hydrogen chain, and it looks like it's an electric flag with a two-prong outlet. If I plug that two-prong outlet into a power strip like you have with your computer, that's kind of like a photoreceptor zone, which is within the grana of the leaf. And so think about all these chlorophylls plugging into these energy stacks. And the way these energy stacks form, if it's a really highlight plant, these things are going to be stacked like dynamos, kind of like these. They look like a stack of pancakes. If it's low light, I'm going to spread them out so I have more photoreceptors, so what light I get gets into the leaf. Once I lock the leaf into this kind of position, I cannot undo it. So if we change the light situation around a tree, we're stressing the tree for that year, or if it's an evergreen for multiple years, because once this is locked in, it's pretty much locked in as a tissue. Now, the chlorophyll is a different thing because chlorophyll is like an old speaker. If you remember the 1970s, you'd buy a pair of speakers for your stereo system and you'd have a disc supported by paper in a hole, and you could watch that paper disc move in and out. I blew out a lot of speakers listening to The Who back in the day, and I remember this quite clearly. This thing, once I get hit with some energy, it's a magnesium, nitrogen, 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 nitrogen. That's a center flag. Everything is carbon, hydrogen, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, except for the center of this flag. It's nitrogen. That's why if your leaves are turning yellow, we think that it might be a nitrogen problem because chlorophyll, as this flag, it's like that speaker that you had in the 1970s. If you turned your stereo up all of the way, that vibration, the disc will rip. It will rip the paper. The Kinks did that. They used razor blades on their speakers to give the distortion that they needed for their first hit. But the point being, chlorophyll breaks down and it's constantly being rebuilt in the leaf. So as long as we keep rebuilding chlorophyll, the leaf is going to be reflecting green because the chlorophyll is overwhelming any other pigments that happen to be in the leaf. When we have problems, we get colors. On the left, you can see this is a white oak with an interveinal chlorosis. Probably the pH is high, the carbonates are low, and so I can't get nitrogen and magnesium, particularly magnesium, to rebuild my chlorophyll molecules, except for where it's really close to where it's streaming in as far as our water flow, because remember, all of our nutrition's coming from the roots up through the xylem and into the leaf. So we get this kind of chlorosis and we think, how do we fix this? Usually we're thinking about pH. And if I sprayed the leaf with an iron chelate or some other kind of chelated micronutrient, the leaf might turn green within a couple of days, and then I know exactly what I'm dealing with. On the other hand, the red maple that you see on the right side, this is where salts that are in the soil are accumulating over time into the edges of the leaves and literally burning the edges of the leaves because it's such high salt, I can't keep water in that in a particularly good way. And so that's just a salt burn on a leaf. Now, when we think about fall colors, what we're thinking about first is chlorophyll always being there, and it's usually masking your carotenoids, which are usually your yellows. So if you got rid of the chlorophyll at any point, the leaf is going to turn yellow because carotenoids are cheaper, easier to build. They're not as fragile as far as being broken apart. And so I can keep that yellow in the background even if it's overwhelmed with the green. Of course, there's the other colors that everybody likes. They like the anthocyanins that give us the reds, as well as some of the more complicated carotenoids. But the carotenoids usually are a bit of a simpler structure. The anthocyanins tend to be a more complicated structure, taking a little bit more energy. But if I have carotenoids, I'm going to be in the yellow range. If I have anthocyanins, they're going to be in the red range. Now then, how does this all play out? At the base of the leaf, at the base of the petiole, which is that part that comes from the tissue of the leaf blade and connects it to the stem, the petiole builds a breakaway zone. We're going to call that a series of organized cells that become the abscission zone. And when it gets the right trigger, we're going to start hardening off and depositing suberin in the cell walls and building this breakaway. Now, what starts this process is going to either be something natural like photoperiod, the days are getting shorter, there's a signal that the days are getting shorter, and we start seeing this process get going. That's why we used to say that you always harvested your plants, your trees for fall planting in the Connecticut Valley 1 week after the harvest moon. And we used the harvest moon to get everything in September because we knew the systems were starting to ramp down for the year. It's actually the basis for our federal budget because we couldn't tax grains and tobacco until we had it harvested in the barn. That's why September 30th is the end of the federal fiscal calendar and October 1st starts the new year. In any case, if we get shorter days, we start seeing this zone start building up. And if we see cooler temperatures, it will accelerate the breakaway of this zone. This is your abscission zone. And how it works in the end is the phloem and the xylem, the pipes that are carrying sugars out of the leaf and water into the leaf, are going to start getting plugged. And we're going to plug the phloem first and then the xylem, which means that sugars get stuck in a leaf if it's green or yellow, still doing energy capture. We start building up sugars in the leaf. Now, this can also be a stress response. If I get really hot weather and I start dropping leaves in order to conserve water and keep the plant in good shape, that's a reason that this could start. If I'm lacking water, and we'll see this often happen most popularly on red maples and occasionally on some of the honey locust in parking lots because the heat coming off of the parking lot and the fact that water sheets off the surface of the parking lot, the soil gets really dry compared to the water demand of the leaf. And so we'll see early fall color in parking lots. That could be happening in August rather than in October. If we saw some other kind of a damage on the tree with a hormonal response, certain hormonal responses, particularly with ethylene, can start initiating some of these abscission zones and start leaf drop prematurely. But also damages such as the leaves getting eaten so there's no longer any photosynthetic use to that organ will drop that leaf and get rid of it. And indeed, particularly with water and heat in Southeast US, if we have trees that start going into an early drought abscission, if I can keep the plant alive long enough to drop the leaves, I can probably save that tree. But if the leaves die before building abscission zones and literally cook on the tree, then that tree's dead. So this abscission zone gets to be an important stress response as well as just an important part of the natural cycle of a leaf. And that's the thing. Trees get stressed all the time. Anytime your climate or your environment changes faster than a tree can grow to accommodate the environmental change, that plant's in stress. So if you're doing home improvements or you're clearing land, even if you're trying to conserve certain trees and certain shrubs, by changing the light, changing the water, changing the soil, changing the structure of the community, you're probably stressing the plant. So you might expect an early fall color or an early fall leaf drop in response to the changes of the environment. And it's probably not the end of the world as long as the trees can drop the leaves instead of having them die without dropping off. Usually what happens when abscission starts, chlorophyll is no longer replenished at a rate at which it's used up. And so we see the yellows start coming out. The yellow was always there with the carotenoids. It's just that we couldn't see them. So there's no new generation of color with a lot of our yellow, although if the weather's good and the fall is long, you may see a cleaner, more intense yellow in certain species, particularly in the populous group. That's why you're going to see a lot of poplar trees here. But also, same thing is happening with the pine needles. In this case, the Scots pine. They lose their chlorophyll, and now we're seeing a brown with a yellow, and sometimes it can be a very clear yellow, particularly with eastern white pine. It can be a vibrant yellow. So here is the big tooth aspen. This is on a forest floor, and I'm just pointing out that the one side of the leaf, the adaxial surface or the top that's presented to the sun, you can see it lying on the forest floor. As water hits it, it's smoother, it's waxier and sleeker, and all the water sheets right off. Whereas with all of the stomata, little tiny hairs, and a rougher surface, even with the waxy profile on the bottom of the leaf, when you see the abaxial or the bottom side of the leaf, you'll see the water pool up. And so going through the forest in the fall, early in the morning in the dew, you can see this difference on a lot of different species. And it's just kind of neat to look at. And it's neat to, especially if you're with brother, sister, children, grandchildren, or what I tell my students, if they're with their parents on Thanksgiving break, to talk about this to convince them they're learning something so their parents will pay for one more semester of tuition. That was meant as a joke. I can't see anybody, but I hope that at least the joke got carried forward. The thing is, you can have these beautiful colors, and here we have a huge group of Populus tremuloides, the quaking aspen, beautiful fall color. But the thing is, it's only as good as the soil that's carrying the community, because you have to have a healthy leaf before you can have a healthy response to this seasonal change of environment. So the first thing about fall color is what's good for a leaf during the summer is going to be better for the fall color later on in the year. And if it's really good, here's something that's usually in a yellow, but if I have a really long, mild fall and I get sugars trapped in that leaf and I have really bright, sunny days that are a little bit warm, not hot, but a little bit warm with enough water in the soil to keep things moving, I'm going to see excess sugar and the development of red pigments even over something that usually gets to be more yellow based on the quality of the environment. Other plants just make it their business to be red. Here we have Acer rubrum, red maple. This is October Glory, cultivated variety of red maple. And here you've got anthocyanins and carotenoids in the reds, and they're really expensive to make as a red. But if you're building the sugars, you're going to have a good season. So if it's really dry, you'll get red, but it won't be as vibrant. If it gets if it just never gets really cold at night, you're going to get washed out reds and probably more of an orange hue into this because you really need those cooler temperatures in the evening to keep the signal response going. Notice on the right side of the picture, those bright yellows going down the street are all ginkgo biloba. That's a deciduous conifer. It's a pretty unique plant in its own right, but that one just gets more and more yellow and a cleaner and cleaner yellow on these really good years. Even in the best year, Thuya occidentalis or arborvitae, the fall color is going to be just, we're no longer green, we're going to be brown and we'll fall off. So it's not showy as far as the color, but it is striking to see those light browns juxtaposed with the dark brown in the canopy, which are all the cones. And in a forest setting, I think that's just really striking. It's kind of cool to see. And the fact is, that's perfectly normal. You shouldn't be panicking over that. It's when those browns are at the tips that's when you've got to be a little bit nervous. Some plants turn faster than others. This is staghorn sumac, Rus typhina. It's called staghorn sumac because you have all of this fuzzy trichome hair all over the stem, all over the petiole. The leaves also have a bit, but it's not quite that hairy. But here we get an early red fall color developing to call birds in to get at the fruits. And poison ivy will do this too. Virginia creeper as a vine will be a bright red before anything else. They're calling the birds in from a high altitude and saying, hey, there's food down here. And so some plants start this very early and their colors reliably quite vibrant because they start the process while the environment still has time to really develop those colors. And then we have things that just break the rules. The yellow that you see here could be a little bit more orangey yellow. You can see some of the orange in the background. This is American beech, excuse me. And in this case, even though you get the signal with young trees, the abscission layer just does not form. So we get this delay in response, but we get the change in photoperiod, so we get a change in color, and it's yellow. And yellow still produces sugars and energy, so these trees are still grabbing energy after the other species over the top of them have dropped their leaves. So now you get an energy boost going into fall to make up for the fact you've been in the shade all summer long. So one theory is marquescence, the keeping of leaves on these younger trees, is really a strategy to grab more energy so that they can compete in the understory situation. Of course, other plants do that, and even oaks do this, and oaks, they just turn brown. And so another thought is that by keeping the leaf in an unpalatable way on that stem, the leaf and the base of the petiole is protecting the bud, the vegetative bud for next year. And so instead of the deer browsing that bud off, they'll go to something that doesn't have all this crispy, dry, nasty stuff all over the twig. So there's a couple reasons why you might keep your leaves. We really don't know the absolute truth on that. But we know that several species, particularly in the understory, will go yellow and stay yellow, which means they are still collecting energy after all of the top of the canopy is blown off to the elements. And again, it gets to be pretty reliable. Here we have Populus deltoides versus Populus tremuloides. I just think that it's really cool to look at these leaves and see the variation even within the species as to what's going on. If we understand it's about our light signals coupled with our water and our temperature signals, horticulturally, we can do some awesome things. These are some trees in Berlin, Germany, and they're sugar maple, Acer saccharum, and they're growing indoors inside of this building. And we have refrigerant lines in the soil system. So when we get the photo period, the day length response, and we know when that happens for this tree, and we're measuring the leaves occasionally. Once we know we've hit that photo period, what they do is lower the lobby temperature by several degrees in this building, but then they start chilling the soil and tricking the trees into a natural fall color. They turn brilliant orange. They drop all their leaves. We hold the plant to a certain number of hours below 45 degrees at night. So we get a chilling requirement on this tree over the winter. And then we warm up the soil again and they go into flower the next spring. So you can actually control the timing if you know how to control the temperature plus the light while not managing the water. Because once you start losing leaves, you're not going to use water as much. So it's a balance of all three of those things. And when you think about it, if we hold the weather steady, we hold the light steady, but we change the soil depth and we change the access to water, you can read a landscape based on fall colors because the same trees are going to be holding that color, and that goes across the region. But if I go south, I'll get a different signal, and so we change when the colors hit based on both photo period and temperature.
If I can just interrupt for a second.
Yeah.
Uh, I did just launch the poll for everyone, so you should be able to see that whether you're on a computer or on your phone. And if you'd like to, go ahead and complete those questions as Jason continues to talk. Thanks, everyone.
Okay, how are we doing? Yep, all right. So basically timing. How do we deal with this? The Earth always spins on the axis in a very specific way. And we're always going to start our estimation of when things are going to hit based on a range of October 5th to October 10th, hitting in the Delaware Water Gap first. And so that when I'm thinking about my peak color, that's when I start looking at the calendar. It's going to go from north to south, from west to east in the north, and from east to west in the south, based on our weather patterns and where the water's coming from. So we got about a 2-week window. You could expand that out to 3 weeks, depending on your weather patterning of that year. When it hits its peak, we're going to change that date estimation based on the quality of all the leaves coming in at the beginning of this, from the summer into the fall, and then how is the weather hitting the leaves once they start that abscission trigger. That's how we start our timing. Let's see here, I gotta get the slide to move. The color type, it's going to be about your water status, and it's going to be about temperature. If you have happy, healthy leaves going into October, warm, sunny days with cold nights just above freezing is going to give you your highest intensity reds and also your cleanest yellows. And that's because the yellows keep building sugars, but the sugars can't get out of the leaves, and the reds need the sugars. So if you don't have that, if you don't have that weather, your colors start washing out. They start getting a little bit murky, and they tend to move towards the yellows because the yellows are always there. For your backyard, you can hedge your bets by looking at the mineral nutrition of your plant going through the summer, making sure that the plant is really running on all cylinders going into the fall without over fertilize. You don't want to over fertilize and force growth, but you want to make sure things aren't all that limited. So you want to do a status check, usually midsummer, early summer. Make sure that you're where you need to be. And if it's dry, you water your plants. That should position you for better fall color. Once things start moving, then it's really all about the weather. And if you see a frost coming, if there's a way of getting the ground wet and maybe some of the canopy wet, that water takes a lot of energy before it freezes, and you can actually protect things a little bit, particularly in your small plants or like a very expensive Japanese maple or something like that. But the party ends when you have a breakaway zone and you get a high wind. We saw a lot of leaves come down today on campus because the wind just overpowered the abscission zone, even though we had some color to go. Once you get a hard frost, it's all over. Everybody's saying good night, goodbye. We'll see you next year, except for those that did not build the breakaway zone, the abscission zone, the beech, the hornbeam, the young beech, the young hornbeam, some of those species, and all of those pines and spruces, the hemlocks, the fir trees, because they're supposed to be multiple year leaves. Okay, let's see here. Let's do that. In the end, it's a fall color and what people want to see. It seems to be about the intensity of the reds and oranges because everybody sees yellow. So what you can do is bias towards selecting plants that give you that red fall color. A lot of your oaks do that, and they support a lot of habitat, particularly for arthropods and insects and things like that. What I also like are trees like sourwood, beautiful red and sourwood. We don't see enough of those getting planted. They call it sour gum or black tupelo, also a gorgeous red color. Dogwoods will have a purplish red, um, but black maple, which we ought to be planting more of, is very close to sugar maple, but it has a yellow fall color, but it's a clean yellow fall color that gets more intense. And it's used to high heat as well as real cold. And it's actually native to parts of New Jersey. So if you are looking for a clean yellow, but in something that looks like a maple that has a really strong form and also a really sweet sap that you can tap, black maple would also be something I'd look at this point. So that's what I got. I hope it's useful to you. Any questions?
Thank you, Jason. We do have a few questions. Uh, some people did appreciate your joke. We got some smile faces coming through. So when you made
Oh,
the
thank
joke about the
goodness.
students, yeah. Let's see. Sarah asks, what kind of microscope can be used to see the cross section of pine needles?
That was a basic dissecting scope, I believe at 25 power.
Mm,
But you could see that from anything that you could pick up at a toy store for kids. You don't need anything all that special. You can even see a lot of this with a good magnifying glass as far as the growth structures. You want to get down to the cell level, well, then you're probably going to need to have, um, you know, standard run of the mill microscope, maybe a wet slide.
All right, thanks. All right, here's a question from Jody. If you have a tree that's native to the south and it's planted in the north, does it have added stress just from where it's being where it's living? And how does that affect the leaf color and the leaf drop?
Excellent questions. So the true answer is it depends. It depends on a lot of things. But if we're bringing things from the south up to the north, if we're within its natural range, now what we're talking about is the metapopulation or the provenance of that plant. And one would assume that the environmental triggers are in place. So as long as you don't winter kill it that first year, you should be setting things up so the second year the leaves are 1 year organs or even a multi-year organ, but they'll start setting themselves up for the current environment that they're in. But it's getting through that first year. What we have seen and what is kind of interesting is you could build a transect of different latitudes, and you could actually, if you ordered them in a landscape, one would expect that you would see a wave of color based on the cues being hit earlier in those southern genotypes moving to the northern genotypes.
All right. Um, I did find really interesting what you said about the fiscal calendar and how that was tied to the crop harvest.
Yeah, it was the
Although,
Connecticut Valley.
as a water person, I'll pretend that that's tied to the water year.
Yeah,
Um, Linda noted that with the drought this year, there's a lot of leaves that have turned brown without dropping,
that's
and
a
they'll probably
problem.
hold on.
Yeah, so those ones are problematic. If they could drop the leaves and they didn't lose all of their leaves, jury's up, but they probably will be okay, but you might see some dieback. Um, but what we're seeing, what I have been seeing is because of that drought, we lost a lot of leaves. So even if we got good color with the rain, and even, if we can get good color now, in the gross, looking at the whole landscape across the valley, you'll have less color because you have less leaves turning that color. So the density of saturation drops in a community, but individual leaves might still be gorgeous.
A question from Sarah. My eastern white pines have dropped an extremely high amount of needles in pine cones, more than any other year. Do conifers have mast years as deciduous trees do? I live in the Bayshore area.
Okay. Pines will have heavier and lighter years. It's based on the weather of 2 years ago, as far as the initial set, because cones take a couple years to mature before they release. So part of this is going to be stacked over several months. As far as an unusual amount of needle drop, it's one of two things. Without seeing it, I don't know. But if I'm seeing a lot of needles and they're all the innermost needles and they're all between two big whorls of branches, it could be you just had a lot of needles set up that year. So it's unusual as far as what's dropping because it was unusual what was there a couple years ago as a brand new needle. However, if I look and I see that those are naturally dropping, but I'm also losing needles in the current season's growth, and I can see damage on a lot of needles, then you've got a problem and you want to get somebody looking at it for a diagnosis. And there are some problems with eastern white pine that we did not used to have, because eastern white pine works best when your summer average daily temperature is about 75 degrees or less. We've been really hot for several years, and so pines are struggling a bit. So you may want to have that tree looked at, but it's the pattern of the needle drop that you want to focus on.
Thank you for that. That was fascinating. Um, there's a couple other questions here. One is if you can say anything about pin oaks, and the second, if you can suggest any trees near the ocean, as a lot of trees don't survive there due to the salt.
Yeah, indeed. Um, So, opinions or thoughts about pin oak? I think it's a great tree. I love the fall color. Um, Seems to be more adept on wetter sites. That's where That's where it goes when it can. It's tolerant of a lot of things. Bacterial leaf scorch still is taking them out. Nothing's changed there. Um, and excuse me, let's face it, it's a really tiny acorn, so it won't destroy your BMW if you park underneath it. So it has things to recommend it. I'm not sure what kind of opinions. I happen to like the species a lot. But that said, I like a lot of species, so I don't think that says much. As far as shore trees down the shore, I should know this, but I always blank on questions like that. But you know, reach out to me online. Just go to Rutgers Urban Forestry. You can find me quickly, or use my email that you see right there. Um, the books are right behind me from the Carolinas and some of the studies on shoreline recommendations. And I could see what's in the books and look it up for you.
Great, thanks. Well, I want to thank you again, Jason, for presenting. That was quite interesting. And we'll wrap it up here. So thanks everyone for showing up this evening and sticking around for this talk. And thank you again, Jason.
Not a problem. Take care, folks. Oh, can I just ask, which tie works best? The students told me to wear all three. I'm just wondering if there's anybody that wants to chime in and say something.
I love the ties anyway.
Okay.
There you go. We should have added it to the poll. Thanks,
We
everyone.
should have. We should have. Take care, folks. Have a good night.